Hey, I'm Derek, it's me, Derek, and it's time for a fresh and fruity Bandicoot-y flavored video of Stop Skeletons and Fighting. Let's flash back to 2009. The Black Eyed Peas had a stranglehold on the pop charts, but Keyboard Cat had a stranglehold on our hearts. It was also a landmark year for the Apple App Store, which was then actually known as the iTunes App Store. In April, in just its 9th month, the App Store celebrated its billionth download. Now, of course, the vast majority of App Store downloads were, and still are, games, and believe it or not, this first billion was before blockbusters like Angry Birds and Doodle Jump. I mean, it's wild enough to think that there was even a time before Angry Birds, but who then, during this time, was the king of the App Store? Luckily for us, Apple revealed the top 20 best-selling paid apps in celebration for that first billion. So any guesses at all, who was on top? Now, I thought for sure the crown belonged to a flip phone staple, like a pre-smartphone hit like Bejeweled or Tetris, right? I mean, those games are like the original time wasters. But nope, they're at number 4 and number 9, respectively. What the hell could beat Bejeweled and Tetris? Oh, I know, it's gotta be iFart, the fart app. Right? Nope, that one's farting it up at a still very respectable number 16. There can be only one, and that one was none other than Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. Wait. So you're telling me that while Sony's former mascot Superstar was grasping for relevancy on consoles, this random port of an old spin-off racing game that was actually originally released on Symbian phones was absolutely crushing it on the newly minted App Store? Well, we have to make a video about that, because keep in mind, this was 2009. It had been a long time since anyone had said the words Crash Bandicoot and best-selling in the same breath.
I have to ask you to leave. You're hurting my elbow.
But a couple things about Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. Actually, more than a couple, but it's just the intro. Despite its legacy as being the App Store's first hit game, it has been completely delisted, just one of countless others left behind in Apple's scorched earth approach to preservation. But it gets worse, because we didn't just lose a significant and historic mobile game, and a significant and historic Crash Bandicoot game, but we also lost evidence of one of the most confusing series of games, maybe ever? And I don't just mean Crash's entire run of mobile games, just the kart racers. Nothing can prepare you for this branding nightmare. Welcome to Delisted, the show that highlights digital games pulled from digital stores or abandoned by the march of time. And it's time to return to the beginning of the smartphone era and beyond to look at the weirdest part of the Crash Bandicoot timeline. This is the bizarre world of Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. Crash Bandicoot is one of the most famous video game characters of all time for two reasons. He is a titan in the pantheon of mascot platformers, and he has had an impressively messy legacy. Yeah, how you doing, Crash Boom Bang? Things got rough once the keys passed from Sony and Naughty Dog to Vivendi, Universal, and eventually Activision. He has definitely been having a moment lately, though it has not always been blue skies for old Mr. Bakuti. Though through it all, his kart racing games have been consistent. Despite the many sequels, crossovers, and spin-offs, there have been only 3 kart racers: Team Racing, Nitro Kart, and Tag Team Racing, and they've been a relatively bright spot on his catalog. Okay, maybe not Tag Team Racing so much, but if nothing else, they have all delivered more than just your garden variety Mario Kart clones. In fact, it is this solid kart legacy that led to Nitro Kart 3D on iOS. No doubt why it was such a hit. The people love the Bakoot, and people love a good Bakoot kart racer. So let's dive right in. Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D for iOS, a game that has unfortunately become one of his rarest. I'm shocked that I get to actually hold this in my hands. Big thanks to Mateus for sharing their old iPod Touch with us. As you probably kind of expect, this being an iOS game, it is hella delisted and nearly impossible to play unless it has been pre-installed on an Apple device from before the great iOS 8 apocalypse. Let's see if we're really missing out on much. Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D was released on iOS, day and date with the iTunes App Store, July 2008. It was in fact a launch title, along with 2 other top sellers, Super Monkey Ball and Crow Mag Rally. So playing this game is truly going back to the humble beginnings of the smartphone era. And I'm assuming the name was some kind of play to Crash's glory days, because Nitro Kart 3D has the character models of Crash with the Titans with the modified courses of tag team racing. It is mostly an original game, but still a Frankenstein's monster of various Crash games except Nitro Kart. But it is in 3D, so at least that title isn't a complete lie. Oh, and get a load of this face.
What have you done to its eyes?
It's amazing. Every character has this deadened expression on their face, like they're trapped against their will in some kind of Squid Game. The character models barely ever animate, and their faces never animate, and everyone just looks terrified. Except for Polar. You know, Polar's just happy to be included. You want to know how old this game is? The intro movie is just literally a QuickTime movie file that you can pause or skip. The game itself is full-featured with 12 tracks across 3 cups, plus extra modes like Time Trial, Story Mode, and my personal favorite, Quick Race, which immediately drops you into a random track. Yeah, right on the main menu. As soon as the game loads, you can be in a race with a single click. This feature is actually in the console version too, but it is a super smart addition on the iOS version. Absolutely perfect for a little break at your desk or a quick fix on the bus. I mean, really the only mode that's missing here is multiplayer. In taking on the game's story mode, you'll tackle a series of 8 missions that see you swapping control between Crash, Coco, and Yaya, a character born from the mobile games. The actual story is as standard as humanly possible. You gotta stop Nitrous Oxide and Cortex from, doing bad stuff to Yaya's island paradise. Though the addition of a brand new character, Yaya, is pretty cool. Specific objectives vary, ranging from ensuring that one of your partners finishes the race ahead of the baddies, collecting more Wampa fruit than the baddies, or simply coming in first place yourself. And I can appreciate that they aren't trying to reinvent the wheel with this campaign. The thing is, I found these to be really hard because these controls. This is a full tilt motion controlled game with acceleration on all the time. Tapping the screen makes you jump, tilting and holding will cause you to power slide, and jumping off of ramps will cause you to nitro boost when you land. There is absolutely zero control customization. This is how the game controls. But it is a game that you can play with one hand and a thumb. The controls have a surprising amount of nuance, but it's mostly okay for just racing. It's when things start getting demanding that you really see the limits of these controls. A few of these story missions really tested my patience. Collecting CRASH in races is also how you unlock stuff, and getting them all while also trying to finish in a decent position can be a surprising pain in the ass. Most of us could stomach motion controls in 2008, when it felt like it was the future. Like when we all thought that a movie being in 3D was worth twice the price of a normal ticket. But a decade later, nah son, I really wish I could play this game on a controller. I mean, it's fine for winning races, but the precision you need to finish some of these missions, Grassland Paradise is doomed for nitrous fuel. Sorry, Yaya. But the races themselves are pretty good. Track design is impressive and chock full of set pieces, shortcuts, lots of fun jumps and boost pads. A few of the tracks are quite long, but instead of 3 laps they are only 2. Another smart choice, the game just never feels like it's overstaying its welcome. Kind of a shame about the controls, but I still enjoyed my time with Nitro Kart 3D. It's not hard to see why it sold well, and it really feels like a product of its era in a charming way. It's the type of game that people should be able to go back to, like the original Gran Turismo or Smash Bros. Now maybe I'm romanticizing this era a bit because it is currently so tough to preserve it and get a hold of games like this, but I don't know, Nitro Kart 3D's neat. Nitro Kart 3D gets 5 neats out of 5. Because it's neat, alright? It's neat. But of course, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D didn't just burst from the App Store perfectly formed. We have a history here. It is not possible to talk about this game without shifting into reverse and retracing the skid marks. We have to. I mean it. Because when researching this video, I found the most confusing lineage of video games, at least that I've ever seen. Listen, we do dumb around here, but buckle the coot up. So in 2001, the keys to the Crash Bandicoot franchise changed from Sony to Vivendi and Universal. Sony's Golden Boy was no longer bound to console exclusivity, and his first major outing, Wrath of Cortex, eventually landed on all of the big 3 systems. But it was with the 2003 holiday release of Crash Nitro Kart that things escalated. This game right here, would unfortunately set into motion a cataclysm of events that no prophet could have ever foreseen. PS2, GameCube, Xbox, of course, but why stop there? Why not port this Crash Kart across every platform that can feasibly run it? GBA? Yeah. Nokia N-Gage? You mean the future of gaming? Yes! Yes, we can! So, GBA Crash Nitro Kart. I know this is technically a show about delisted games, but we have the opportunity to talk about every single one of Crash's portable racers, so why not? And for a GBA racer, Nitro Kart is about what you'd expect. Released alongside its console siblings in November 2003, it has your standard flat plane maps, your Mode 7 style courses, underneath your pseudo 3D racers. It at least has a decent range of racers and stages to choose from, but also a totally unnecessary hub world in the adventure mode, which is the type of overachieving I can really appreciate. The nitro boosting is done by holding R and tapping the gas, which is basically backwards from the console version. That took me a bit to readjust, but all in all, it's probably up there with Mario Kart Super Circuit and Konami Crazy Racers. I mean, it is at least better than Ants Extreme Racing or Shrek Swamp Kart, or did you know they made a Crazy Frog racing game? Kart racing games on the GBA is a frighteningly low bar, but Nitro Kart I think still delivers. But I'm Uncle Derek. I got a reputation to maintain. Can't stop at the GBA, not when I have access to something so much weirder, the Nokia N-Gage. Released a few months later than the other versions in summer 2004, first of all, I was completely shocked to learn that Crash Nitro Kart for the N-Gage is nothing like the GBA version, which is an extremely rare thing for an N-Gage game. You can barely glance the N-Gage's library without a GBA port slapping you across the face. But no, N-Gage Nitro Kart bucks the trend by being an honest-to-Aku port of the original game with actual 3D design. Coming to us from the always dependable Vicarious Visions, Nitro Kart on the N-Gage looks great, runs smoothly, has a full suite of unlockables, and is virtually unplayable due to the system's stupid vertical screen. Or you'd think it would be, but this port is actually tailor-made for the N-Gage's stupid screen. First of all, handling is super generous. Thank God, because your field of vision is terrible thanks to that stupid screen. But this game earns the Nitro in the title. I mean, turns come fast, it's nearly impossible to see what's coming up, but it controls surprisingly well. The 5 key is your accelerator, with the 2 key being your hop and power slide. The thought of doing a slide boost at first seems completely ludicrous, and it is extremely disorienting, but I found that by the 3rd lap, I'd typically gotten familiar enough with the tracks and was successfully nitro sliding around tight corners. Also, hitboxes for items are extremely generous. The game meets you halfway when it comes to getting items and blasting opponents. And with a packed roster of 8 racers at once, it has a controlled chaos feeling that I actually really enjoyed. I will say this game does in fact move very fast and is much easier to play with the system a few inches from your face, not a couple feet away from you with your arm craned around a camera. Sorry the footage is so bad, I swear I'm actually not this bad when I can play this like a normal person. It probably wasn't a system seller, actually I know for a fact it wasn't a system seller, but Vicarious Visions made it work on the hardware and most importantly proved that Crash Nitro Kart can be done on a cell phone. And now that we have seen the good examples, we begin our true descent into Crash Nitro insanity. I'm not even really joking here. Researching all this stuff gave me such a headache, and for the stuff that I talk about, that is saying something. Despite a strong showing on the N-Gage, it became immediately clear to all parties involved that it was not going to revolutionize cell phone gaming. So of course, Universal Interactive turned from Symbian OS to the good old J2ME. Here, we have our first properly delisted version of Crash Nitro Kart. Released in fall 2004, almost a full year from the proper console version, and you know, you can't fault something for meeting your exact expectations. Yeah, the sound of getting a power-up is the only sound in the game. And I accidentally left my sound up too high, and it almost gave me a heart attack. The fact that this game only really utilizes a grand total of 1/5 of an average flip phone's already small screen is a pretty impressive feat, in that it's impressive that developer iPlay thought they could get away with something that just barely counts as an actual game. The most basic tracks imaginable paired with interchangeable racers. If not for the occasional change in background and color scheme, you'd swear you were playing the exact same tracks over and over again. Though if you stick with it, you'll experience the unfathomable euphoria of a jump over water. While it in fact stretches the idea of a functioning video game, This is where flip phone gaming was at. Props to the N-Gage for really pushing boundaries. You can't really hate on the Java port here because this was the state of the rest of cell phone gaming. It showed that Nokia was really onto something with the N-Gage, even if the initial execution left a lot to be desired. Even with the exact same screen real estate issues, N-Gage was far closer to a bona fide gaming experience. But then again, it was on the N-Gage, so of course it failed to make much of a splash. Crash Nitro Kart on Java, on the other hand, was apparently a million seller. 2005 saw the third major Crash racing title, Crash Tag Team Racing. Despite being an absolutely bonkers game, it reviewed about as well as Nitro Kart, but sold less, not even moving a million units. It too got a milquetoast Java port in late 2005. But the name of this port, Crash Racing. What the hell kind of name is that? I understand why they took out the tag and team from the title, but taking out the Bandicoot makes it sound like a destruction derby or burnout game. Crash Racing. Naming decisions aside, trust me, we will talk about that in a minute. It's better looking and better playing, plus has the kart fusion mechanic from Tag Team Racing, making it like the most faithful port of a Crash Racing game. But of course they went with that name. I don't know. Still, it is pretty impressive that Tag Team Racing was on the big three consoles plus PSP and Java-based cell phones. If not for the impending Mario Kart DS, it would have landed there as well. Mario Kart DS, by the way, wound up selling 23 million copies, but I think some kart competition from Crash would have bumped that number down a little. But anyway, this is where the Crash Bandicoot team started playing it really fast and loose with the naming conventions. Despite releasing as a tie-in to Tag Team Racing, a vague name like Crash Racing sounds like you're also trying to tie it into the first Crash Team Racing and not trying to also promote the new game Tag Team Racing. This is our sign that branding troubles were a-brewin'. As the years pushed the calendar to the late 2000s, Bash created Smush and his console games were at their lowest point. 2007's Crash of the Titans and 2008's Mind of a Mutant were not exactly setting the world on fire. However, the money must have still been moving because the mandate came down. The market demands more mobile Crash racers. And it is here where we see our first iteration of Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D, rubber bandicooting onto Symbian OS phones on April 29th, 2008. And if this looks familiar, it should. This is the same game that was released on the iTunes App Store a few months later in July 2008. That's right, the awful truth is that the best-selling game on the App Store wasn't even an original game. It was a port. But now that we've retraced our way back from the early days, you can see that Nitro Kart 3D was leagues ahead of Crash's last mobile outing. In just 2.5 years, the technology had progressed by bounds. We should probably mention that this game was made by PolarBit, using their proprietary Fuse engine. Fun fact about all the PolarBit games I've been playing recently, in the credits they always claim that they focus on state-of-the-art content for high-end mobile and handheld devices, and all their games are a mobile top-notch title. And I've found this to be mostly true. They did good work, and PolarBit brought the goods with Nitro Kart 3D. We have voices, music, sound effects in-game, and a full 3D racing experience that feels like a real game as opposed to a neat little time waster. The differences between this version and the iOS version that would become a million seller are actually pretty minimal. The first difference happens right away. There is no skippable QuickTime movie here. This version instead starts up with this bizarre animation of Crash spinning and doing the splits. Feels like it's supposed to sync up with the music, but it doesn't. It's just this random, terrible animation of Crash, and then it's gone. Oh god, it's so weird. No surprise they cut this for the iOS port. The iOS port would also see some graphical improvements, but both still have pretty bad pop-in on the horizon. For the time, this game looks and runs great. Symbian is missing 2 characters. Polar and Dingodile were iOS exclusives, patched in later in 2010. There are sound effects in this version I never heard in the iOS version. I mean, really, the biggest difference here is no forced motion controls. But then again, I wouldn't say that a telephone number pad is much of an upgrade, or so I assume. This is, of course, emulation footage. But That is a bonus for the original Symbian version. It's been preserved and is playable through emulation. But Symbian users who hadn't made the switch to Apple devices weren't missing out on too much. It was a solid racer on either platform. But let's stop for a moment. I'm gonna take some aspirin. And while I do this, do me a favor, look at that name. Look at that name, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. And really look at it. And remember that and memorize it, okay? Because it will be important. The Symbian version, the original version of Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D, dropped April 29th, 2008. 4.5 years after the original console version of Crash Nitro Kart. Like, that's kind of weird already, right? However, Nitro Kart 3D is actually more of a version, probably ain't right to call it a port, a version of 2005's Crash Tag Team Racing, except with everything in the way of the clashing cars together and the titular tag team play removed. So it's barely a port of Tag Team Racing, it's definitely not a port of Nitro Kart at all. I'd sooner say it's actually an original Crash Bandicoot game that just happens to have karts and the word Nitro in the title. And both these games are already in 3D, so it's not like some kind of huge get for these mobile games. So what are we doing here? Is the 3D in the title here to distinguish it from the previous mobile Crash Nitro Kart? No, because as a matter of fact, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D for Symbian phones was released alongside a Java-based 2D version called Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart. No, not Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 2D, just Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart. I found an old press release where they refer to the game as the 2D version, yet that is not the name. Now, I know what you're saying. Is he really going to keep talking about this? And yes, I am. And does this mean that there are 3 separate games called Crash Nitro Kart? And no, there are 2 games called Crash Nitro Kart, and then this game called Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart. Oh, but don't worry. Vivendi would later change that name to something less confusing, Crash Nitro Kart 2. I am losing my mind. They dropped Bandicoot for some reason, and now this is a sequel to the 2004 Java game? A game that was barely a game in the first place? Despite the fact that it's actually building off of the second Java game, Crash Racing? Yes, because I'll remind you, it was apparently a million seller and therefore was a legacy worth continuing, I guess. Oh, but don't get confused and think that this is a sequel to the N-Gage version either, which is also technically a mobile phone version, but is an actual faithful port of the console original. But this means that before they retroactively made this one a sequel, there were 4 different versions of Nitro Kart available on 4 different mobile devices. 5 if you want to count the GBA. But what about good old Crash Racing? Where does that fit into this picture? It doesn't. Everyone's completely forgotten about Crash Racing, as well they should, because it somehow still has the stupidest name of all. So the 2D version of Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D became Crash Nitro Kart 2, and all is fine. But of course, Nitro Kart 3D ended up being a surprise hit on iOS and got a sequel. And what is that game called? Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 2. Why must you hurt? Why must you hurt me? They dropped the 3D, shoved the Bandicoot back in there, and thought they'd get away with it? This means that at this moment, on planet Earth, there does not exist a game called Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart. And if all this actually seems rather straightforward, you are welcome. Because researching, not to mention just Googling these games and putting all this together was a nightmare that neither you nor anyone else will have to endure. This is my legacy. This is what I leave behind. This is my mark on the world. This is what I was put on this earth to do, I guess. But, well, what about Crash Nitro Kart 2? It is at least a massively improved game with so much more packed in. It is essentially a downgraded version of Nitro Kart 3D, so we get a lot of the same additions. Yaya Panda, a story, considerably faster gameplay, that same weird menu song, and music during races. I really dig this almost Star Fox looking aesthetic, and look at all these game modes. And if that weren't enough, it now utilizes a whopping 1/3 of your cell phone's screen. Really, the game it's fine. It's all overshadowed by the fact that it exists in the first place, and its stupid name helped create one of the stupidest naming fiascos of all time. The next game in our timeline is our old friend, the iOS port, which again launched with the App Store in July 2008. We have officially come back to where we left off. But the weird legacy of Nitro Kart 3D is far from finished. If you'll remember, after the N-Gage system flopped, Nokia brought it back as their very own App Store, the N-Gage 2.0. That's right, N-Gage is back, baby! Sort of. And who better for Nokia's Apple App Store killer than good old Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. It's worth noting that this version of the game would have been entirely identical to the version found on other Symbian storefronts, though I guess it might have been easier to find on this flop of an app store. In any case, its availability on N-Gage 2.0 meant that later Nokia phones with actual landscape display capabilities could have downloaded it, which meant you could have experienced this game the way it was meant to be played. Horizontal and on a potato. But honestly, the N-Gage 2.0 as a whole is all pretty poorly documented, so I don't really know a lot of the technical details. But what I can say for certain is that there was another brand of devices that could take Nitro Kart 3D beyond just glorious landscape mode. A brand of devices that could finally bring this game to a proper television, to the living room. But not just any living room, Brazilian living rooms. That's right, where else would this rabbit hole take us? It's Zeebo time. But it wouldn't be any time if not for the support of our wonderful patrons. We're gonna stop the video for a second and say thank you to all the people that support us on Patreon. They help us make ridiculous videos like this. You can help as well for as little as $1. You can learn all about that also in the description below, patreon.com/stopskeletonsandfighting. Okay, back to Zeebo time. Because of course the Zeebo got a port of Nitro Kart 3D. In fact, it was another launch game for both the Brazil and Mexico Zeebo debuts. Now, this is my third version of this game, but my first with the controller. I wasn't a huge fan of the motion controls, but this feels like a monkey's paw curling. I really wish I could play this on a controller. As the world's self-appointed expert on both this game and the Zeebo, this game sucks. It's a bad version of this game and a bad Zeebo game. Trust me, you can trust Uncle Derek on this. It's tough to know where to start, so let's just start at the beginning. This is what greets you at startup. It's that weird animation again, but it's even more poorly timed here because the song is like double speed for some reason. Why? I mean, before, this song was a jaunty hoedown. Now it sounds like it's trying to get me to enroll in clown college. When the drums come in, they sound like they're being played by Animal from the Muppets. Does that snare drum owe you money? Calm down, it's just a Zeebo game. After that, things get worse. Welcome to Crash Nitro Farts in 3D. Now, it is a race to the bottom between Crash Nitro Kart Zeebo and Resident Evil 4 Zeebo for the most hilariously terrible audio I've ever heard in a game. But the winner's probably still Doom 32X. But the most disappointing thing is the controls. This controller, as we've talked about on this channel before, is not good. But there are Zeebo games that control well, or at least fine. This is not one of them. The controls feel even more overly sensitive, and if you so much as get one wheel off the road, your speed immediately plummets. So I'm weirdly enough having a harder time keeping on the road with an analog stick, and the game is way more punishing for mistakes. This controller is making me pine for a telephone number pad. On top of that, it's just a much more difficult game. The AI drivers are much more aggressive, with worse rubber banding, all this while your damn cart won't stop farting. My life for Doom 32X right now. But there is a solution, or at least an alternative. Remember, the Zeebo was released in 2009, and what was everyone trying to copy in 2009? The Wii. That's right, the Zeebo had its own motion controller called the Boomerang. So far, I'd say Nitro Kart 3D controls best with motion controls, so let's see if that's still true for the Zeebo port. As you can see, it's not very responsive, but also too sensitive at the same time. Oh my god, you are making me pine for a tiltable iPod. But I'm nothing if not thorough. I have done my due diligence. There is no good way to play Nitro Kart 3D on a Zeebo. But I want to cut the developers a bit of slack. The Zeebo ran on a custom version of Qualcomm's Brew.
My brew is tight and I'm telling you the deal.
Which was very difficult to port to. So difficult that devs typically had to redo games from scratch, generating a cost of up to 20 times more than expected. That explains why this game plays differently, to the point that it's basically a different and much worse game. But thankfully, it wouldn't be the last mobile racer in the Bandicoot legacy. We've hit rock bottom, now let's get right back to the top. And that brings us to Nitro Kart 3D's 2010 sequel, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 2. Yeah, dropping the 3D from the title makes it sound like a sequel to the 7-year-old PS2 game. But it's not, I swear. Trust me, I double-checked and everything. This game, released exclusively for iOS devices, making it the holy grail of the insane Crash Nitro Tag Racing Team 3D2 Super Fuel titles. Of all the games we've mentioned so far in this video, this is the only one that has not been preserved through some kind of emulation, which is a shame, because it's the best one with the bullet. So Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 2 is almost the exact same as Nitro Kart 3D, just better. First off, they kept the motion controls and added the option for touch controls, which works so much better. But the motion controls are also improved here. It's kind of hard to properly describe this kind of thing, but trust me, Race Kart Marsupial Man sequel move better. On top of that, characters are no longer locked to certain vehicles, which is a nice touch. It adds a little more variety. Though only a few of the cars boost the character's stats, why would I choose a car that doesn't boost my stats? Some kind of optional hard mode, I guess? Also, this game is stacked with modes. Mission, Cup, Time Attack, Eliminator, Collector, Arcade, Skill, and the Pizza Resistance multiplayer. Finally, a mobile game that could have had Team in the title. You went with that. Whatever. Multiplayer is open from the start, but most of these modes, and a lot of the characters and cars, are locked initially, but they start unlocking pretty fast as you work through cups and missions. The game just runs so much smoother, characters look like they have an actual soul, and holy crap, it also sounds better. Listen to this groovy song on the main menu. Man, it feels like I'm in a mid-2000s Old Navy. Or maybe I'm a little biased. Coming off of that Zeebo port, anything sounds good. The racing is even smoother now with improved frame rate and less pop-in. Levels have fewer obstacles, less thwompy squishy things and cannonballs. The collision detection for those traps and obstacles was always really rough, made them way too hard to miss in the previous game. Polar Bit wisely focused more on just turns, jumps, and shortcuts versus obstacles here in the sequel. The final two cups have some seriously complicated and difficult tracks. Missions are still harder than just racing. In Mission 1, you have to power slide and jump to get 80,000 points while also somehow still finishing at least third, and it is insanely difficult. I find it much safer just to race conservatively and not drift. Even though the motion controls are an improvement from the last iOS game, I just could not keep it on the road trying to power slide all the time. But that's actually when I tried the touch controls for the first time, and I beat that mission on my first try. And then when I tried it again while capturing footage, I actually ended up placing even better. I still in general found drifting to be too risky to do during races, but I cranked through those missions, unlocking new characters and cars, and with unlocking new modes in the cups, it's a rich package. I will say that some tracks are a little long, and the previous game offset this by requiring only 2 laps on the longer tracks. That is not the case here in the sequel, and like I said, those last few tracks are an endurance. And I'll say this about both these games, the rubber banding is great. I've finished races with gigantic leads, I've also been nearly lapped by first place despite being in second. But there's still enough racers on the track for that Mario Kart-styled controlled chaos that's so much fun. There are heat-seeking missiles, bombs, Castlevania-style stopwatches to slow down time, a lot of power-ups that can ruin your run. But there's no blue shells or big lightning bolts that can drop you down from first to last place on the final stretch. The 2 iOS Nitro Kart games are great games on their own, but it's meaningful that they are also 2 great Crash Bandicoot games. It is a shame that they are so difficult to get a hold of nowadays, especially this sequel, which is only on iOS. The most tragic though is the multiplayer. It was sorely lacking in the first one and is a big addition here in Nitro Kart 2. In fact, it is the first time a mobile crash racer had multiplayer since the damn N-Gage. I wish I could tell you how it is, but it is hard enough to get your hands on an iOS device that has Nitro Kart 2, but then finding somebody else to copy to battle it out is basically impossible. And by all accounts, it was a pretty well-received entry in Crash's kart racing pantheon. That said, it would also be the last, not just racing game, but last Crash Bandicoot game until the Insane Trilogy 7 years later. At least the era ended on a high note, but as the way things go, it would not last. Nitro Kart 2 for iOS would vanish like all of Crash's mobile racers. And now that you know all about these titles, let's talk about how all of them are now completely lost to the cruel sands of time, at least legitimately. The first version to crash and burn would be the N-Gage 2.0 release, which died alongside the entire service and storefront in September 2010. It's the same story we covered on a previous video. Nokia just couldn't find a way to make the N-Gage work and ultimately pulled the plug on the digital storefront incarnation. That being said, since this version of the game on the N-Gage storefront ran on the same Symbian backend as other N-series mobile devices, players could still purchase and download the game from other sources, including Nokia's follow-up storefront in the Ovi app. Unfortunately, this era of gaming is sorely lacking in coverage and documentation, and it's unclear precisely when applications available through it, including Nitro Kart 3D, would have been taken down. You could probably assume that the Ovi brand's discontinuation at the end of 2012 could serve as the date of the delisting. But then there's evidence that Ovi continued to be updated well into 2014, so really it's anyone's guess as to what to carve onto this particular tombstone. The Zeebo version of Nitro Kart 3D bit the dust along with the Zeebo itself, with September 30th, 2011 marking the closure of the console's ZeeboNet servers and thus preventing the ability to purchase or even download titles. This means that the only way to play the Zeebo version of Nitro Kart 3D is to track down someone's decade-old Zeebo and hope it was downloaded before they shut it all down. Or that you're friends with a modder? While Zeebo modding is coming along, it's my understanding that Zeebo emulation might still have a ways to go, which is too bad because more people should be able to play this game and the Zeebo's many impressively terrible games. Which finally brings us to the iOS version and its iOS exclusive sequel. 2 for the price of 1. Here we go. As with so many iOS apps that have been lost to time, you can mark the first signs of digital decomposition with the release of iOS 8 on September 17th, 2014. It is here where legacy apps on the App Store began to run into all manner of performance and compatibility issues. This was a crossroads. Either devs patched in compatibility with iOS 8, or they didn't, and they simply died on the vine. Needless to say, Activision weren't particularly inclined to try and get Nitro Kart 3D up to spec, instead opting it to just languish. More surprisingly, Nitro Kart 2 was similarly left to rot and malfunction, despite the fact it likely still had a decent number of people still playing it online. Ultimately though, both releases would run their final laps on September 19th, 2017, the day of iOS 11's release, and with the purging of all 32-bit applications from the App Store. With zero interest on Activision's part in attempting to update and remarket these 9- and 7-year-old games, respectively, the Nitro Kart 3D games could only be left to ride off into the sunset, preserved only by the iPods, iPhones, and iPads that haven't been formatted yet. And that is it for Crash's mobile racing games. Let me know if you have any other delisted topics for us to cover. I gotta be honest, the reason we started this whole project was because we had access to a Zeebo, and gotta milk that Zeebo. We have one more Zeebo video left and then we're done, we swear. But this still opened up for us a giant new world of mobile phone games. We see a lot of comments for Silent Hill and Dead Space and other weird stuff, and we'd love to do these, but for some of these games, yes, there's emulation, but also you gotta have a device with them already installed. So if you have one, or know someone that has one, let us know. Email or Twitter at stopskeletons@gmail.com or at stopskeletons on Twitter. Email is probably better because Grace handles the emails. And we got new shelves. Look at the new background. Huh? Fancy, right? Grace's dad said, wow, that looks like a real studio. That only took 15 years. Anyway, I am Uncle Derek. This has been a crazy look at Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D. Of course, huge shout out to all of our beautiful, lovely Patreon supporters. Also, huge shout out to Mateus for lending us their iPod. And also shout out to Kadikarus, who actually got us in touch with them. And you can't do a video on YouTube about Crash Bandicoot games and not have Kadikarus involved in some way. So the invisible hand of Daddy Caddy, of course, here we go. Thank you to those guys. And of course, our Patreon supporters, hey, support us on Patreon. $1 or $2 is all you need to get into the Discord, watch videos early, chat with us while we're recording our podcast, vote on videos, all kinds of fun stuff, or maybe just feel good having your name here and supporting the dumbest channel on YouTube. The dumbest channel on YouTube for 15 years, damn it. All right? Anyway, I'm Uncle Derek. Got producer Grace over here behind the camera. Check out our new set. I might do a video game tour soon. I've kind of been promising a video game tour for like years. Maybe I'll finally do one.
It's probably time.
It's probably time, yeah. But until then, this is Uncle Derek, producer Grace. We are saying goodbye, stay powerful, and we'll see you again real soon. Thanks for watching.